Santis Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the various forgotten collectible card games of old. Now, this does not mean these card games are completely out of people's minds. There are people out there that still love to play them, love to support them, but the companies themselves don't create cards for them anymore, or they've fallen out of popularity so that fewer and fewer people are playing them. So these are those card games, collectible ones, which have fallen by the wayside to a degree. And we've been talking, of course, about Star Trek, the customizable card game. Well, we've been going over the rules for this. Let's go over and finish up with some optional information that you may want to know about. All right. Now, there is an important word to know about. Present. Present is an important word because it links one of your cards to another, a personnel or equipment to another personnel and equipment, that they are present together. Present means that, for example, if you have a personnel at a headquarters, it is present with all the other personnel and equipment that are at that headquarters. They are present there together. If a personnel or equipment is at a planet, it is present with all other personnel and equipment that are at that planet. So you see, those are linked together. Now, if you have personnel or equipment on a ship, it is present with all other personnel or equipment on that ship. If that ship is at its headquarters or a planet, then the personnel and equipment on that ship are not present with that is at the planet or the headquarters itself. When it's on the ship, it's all on the ship together. When it's on the headquarters, it's all on the headquarters together. When it's on the planet, it's all on the planet together. Now, let's talk about combat. There are some cards that allow you to begin a combat. You have to have any number of your personnel in the same location as a number of your opponents in personnel. Any unstopped personnel you have can be involved in this fight, and any personnel of your opponents can be involved in this fight. That's important to note, that is, if all of their personnel is involved in this case. If there are more than one opponent in the same area, then you can choose which opponents become involved in this combat. Now, it is important to note, you cannot begin combat at a headquarters. Can't begin combat there. Each combat will perhaps either have certain skills or characteristics that are required for this combat. If you have your personnel having those skills or characteristics, then you qualify for this combat and activate it. It will be under the description of the card what is required for you to effectively use this card. Once you have successfully begun the combat, though, you have all the requirements to play your combat card, then you total up the total strength of all of your unstopped personnel at this location, and your opponent will do the same thing, total up their entire strength. Again, noting that when I'm starting a combat with an opponent, they get everything, regardless we're stopped or not. It gets everything that they command at the time. So that's the key word there for your opponent. That is what they're commanding for all of your opponents. The one that gets the highest strength of compared to all this personnel wins the combat. It is important to note that on a tie, no one wins. Now, it's important to note that the card that you use to begin the combat will describe the effects of combat. Combat on its own has no real effect. Whether you win, whether you lose, it doesn't do anything. It's only if you are successful at the combat and the card says something happens, then something happens. Once your combat is done, all of your personnel become stopped. None of your opponent's personnel become stopped. So it's all mine are stopped. Now let's talk about engagement. Engagement is like combat, but for ships. Once again, you have to play a card in order to activate the engagement. Once engagement begins at a location, you have to have a staffed ship ready for it. Your opponent's ship doesn't need to be staffed. It could be staffed, it could be unstaffed. If there are multiple opponents at the location, you choose which opponent you're going against. Just like with combat, you choose which of all your opponents you're taking this engagement against just at this point in time. Now, you cannot begin an engagement at a headquarters mission. Oftentimes, the card you're playing, just like within combat, will have a certain skill or characteristic required to begin said combat. In that case, you need that on your ship. Now, some ships allow others to join a combat. You would have to play a card allow for this to be added in. In this case, you could have 2 or more ships against 1, depending on the circumstances. Whoever plays the cards to add themselves into the combat will be involving themselves. In this case, each time you add in a ship, it needs to be a staff ship, and it is a card per ship you are adding in. Each of the 2 players in the engagement will be doing this. They'll be adding as many ships in as they want, which are at this mission, to come up with a big battle between them. To compare them, you look at the weapons of all the ships that you brought in as the beginner of the engagement, and your opponent looks upon all the shields of the ships that they have involved in this engagement, and you compare the 2 of them. If my weapons are greater than their shields, I have won the engagement. If their shields are greater, they have won the engagement. If we tie, no one wins. Now, like with combat, the card that began engagement will define how engagement is successful, how you win it, what are the results of it. Otherwise, if nothing is particularly stated, winning or losing does not matter in an engagement. Regardless, at the end of the engagement, all of your ships and personnel that were involved in it are stopped. Your opponent's ships and your opponent's personnel are not stopped. Now, some cards use the keyword damage. They will say that they will put them on a ship to represent damage to that ship. Each of these cards will have their normal effects and then a damage-based effects that they will list. As soon as you attach this card to the ship, only the damage effects apply anymore. All the previous effects of this card are completely ignored. Only that damage section is taken care of and paid attention to when it comes to your ship. Each of your ships can normally have up to 2 damage and still continue to function. Well, function as long as the damage themselves don't do anything to mess up your ship. The 3rd damage that applies to your ship causes it to be destroyed. All the ship itself and all cards that were on that ship are placed in their owner's discard. They go away. They've been destroyed. Now, it is possible to remove damage from a ship. You have to move a ship to a headquarters where you could play that ship. So it means a headquarters that matches the affiliation of the ship that you're attempting to repair. Then at the end of your turn, you may remove 1 damage from that ship. The exceptions to any of these cases are if you're using dilemmas. If there's a dilemma attached to the ship, when that ship is destroyed, it goes in the bottom of the opponent's dilemma pile. If it was a damage that was caused by dilemma, meaning that the card that's doing the damage is dilemma, when you repair the damage, it again returns to the bottom of the opponent's dilemma pile. Otherwise, once you repair damage, it goes into the appropriate player's discard pile. Now, here's an important note. You cannot use game text to remove a damage card unless it specifically mentions damage. So if an event caused a damage to your ship and is attached to it, and you have a card that gets rid of an event, it will not get rid of the damage card because it does not mention damage. That's simple. That's it. And that's it for today. I talked about important keyword, present. I, of course, then talked about combat, engagement, and damage. Something that you will not need to do in the course of your Star Trek game, but you might have it happen. Some factions are more inclined towards combat than others, and certain times you might want to get into a scuffle with your opponents. But in the next episode, we are going to talk about brigs and captives and go over the glossary. Talk about some keywords that we may have not talked about up to now, you should know about. Just a few. We've gone over most of them that you need to know. But have yourself a great day, and until the next time, I bid you farewell.